Allison. We are here in southwestern Puerto Rico, and down below we are seeing several dozen people living in tents because they are too afraid to go back inside their homes. Puerto Rico was devastated with a 6.4 magnitude earthquake last week, but it has seen a series of aftershocks in the last few days. There has been extensive damages to some homes in the southwestern part of the island. Cities like Guanica and places west of Ponce have been devastated. Now, this is an ongoing concern for people here in Puerto Rico, an island that is still reeling from the effects of Hurricane Maria more than 2 years ago. Many people here want President Trump to sign a major disaster declaration following these earthquakes, and many folks here are still struggling after this hurricane, after Hurricane Maria more than 2 years ago. Just a few days ago, a 13-year-old girl in Vieques, Puerto Rico, died, and her family says that's because they didn't have enough resources on the island, that there is still no functioning hospital on that island. But again, the major concern right now, the more immediate concern that these people are facing, is that many of them fear going back inside their homes because they are waiting for another tremor, another strong earthquake that could potentially level more homes. Now, the largest power plant in Puerto Rico, the Costa Sur power plant, not far from here, it is still out of commission following these earthquakes, and authorities estimate it could take up to a year for it to be repaired. Of course, Puerto Rico's electrical grid is extremely fragile. We saw that after Hurricane Maria, one of the deadliest natural disasters in U.S. history. But again, the aftershocks in the last few days, they've been lower in intensity than what we saw last week during that 6.4 magnitude quake, but there is no telling whether any one of these other tremors could be more serious. And it has changed the landscape of this island. NASA satellites have picked up the change in landscape. It can be seen from space. Again, many people here, we still see some blue tarps in this part of Puerto Rico. Those are, of course, leftovers from Hurricane Maria, where so many people here dealt with major flooding and the catastrophic loss of power that has been experienced. Right now on the island, most of the power has been restored following these earthquakes, but again, the electrical grid is so fragile here. The other power plants on the island have had to compensate for the loss of this major power plant, the Costa Sur plant, on the southwestern part of the island. So we are surveying the damage here, and will continue to do so. We hope to speak with several of these residents that have been displaced. Several thousand people remain in emergency shelters here in Puerto Rico, and they're just waiting, hoping that there are no more major earthquakes as they recover from yet another disaster.
Some people in the Philippines are reportedly defying a mandatory evacuation order, even as the experts warn of a massive eruption as soon as today. As the drone footage shows, Taal now looks less active, but the danger below the surface still points to a very serious threat there. Ramy Inocencio is in Silong, that's south of Manila, with more on the story. Ramy, what are you seeing?
Sure. Good morning. Basically, towns and villages across this region are still dealing with ash that's caked on vehicles just like this. You can see how difficult it is to get it off these tricycles and these cars, but it's also being caked along the homes around here. And we're also even breathing it in as the winds pick it up. But businesses, those have been closed, and scientists are warning everyone here that Taal volcano, not too far from where we're standing right here, could be on the verge of erupting in the next few days, if not the next few hours. Thick volcanic ash blanketed entire towns, caked roads in slippery mud, and covered acres of farmland, turning this normally packed tourist hub into ghost towns of gray. Taal volcano continues to belch ash and steam, and nearly 500 earthquakes have rocked this region ever since Sunday. Officials warn an eruption could be imminent. Nearly 40,000 people were forced from their homes and took shelter in these evacuation centers. Some even fled with their livestock. But the United Nations says as many as 500,000 residents are still at risk. A lot of people are looking at the volcano and saying, oh, not so much to see here.
It's not true. Our instruments are telling us that the significant volcanic activities are still undergoing and the threat's still there.
Research specialist Dr. Winchell Sevilla says observing the volcano for the next few days will be critical.
The high number of volcanic earthquakes, the fissurings that we're observing around the volcanoes, basically the volcano is telling us that the magma is still coming out towards the surface.
Basically, the bottom line that you're telling me is don't be fooled by what we see at the top.
Yes, that is correct, yeah.
And I've been wearing this mask waiting to speak to you guys, in large part because this ash that's blowing all around us really is hazardous to people's health. A lot of people actually don't have masks, the people we've been talking to over the past few days. But this is protecting us from little microscopic crystalline structures inside it. And if you inhale it, people really will be severely affected.
Thousands in the Philippines were forced to evacuate this week after a volcano blanketed parts of the country with ash. Remy Inocencio has more on why experts say the worst is yet to come.
It may be one of the world's smallest active volcanoes, but for 4 straight days now, Taal has been behaving like one of the biggest.
Oh my God!
Its volcanic lightning could first be seen bolting through the evening sky.
It's very surreal. It's like a Hollywood movie.
It's continuing to spew its toxic brew of rocks, steam, and ash miles high, leaving communities coated in a slick muck and forcing the evacuation of tens of thousands of people.
It is dangerous in terms of respiratory ailments, in terms of the fine particles that probably can penetrate your lungs.
We need some more waters!
Much of the local water supply has been poisoned by volcanic ash. Fresh water was first trucked into many areas today. And seismologists predict the worst of Taal is yet to come. With that, some Filipinos decided to get their important business out of the way first.
But now all businesses have been closed, according to the local government, and the threat to life and safety is real. Breathing in that ash is like breathing in tiny shards of glass. Rain could trigger landslides, and if there's a massive eruption out there, that could kick off a tsunami. Elaine?
Remy Inocencio, thank you.
We have to talk about your home country of Australia, because there's a biblical proportion of what's going on down there right now, the cataclysm. Give us an update.
Well, Australians are a resilient people. We've long occupied the driest continent on Earth. And as a kid growing up on farms in rural Australia, I've seen fires before. But none of us have seen anything like this. And I think if I could characterize the national mood at present, it's just serious shock. Put some of the numbers into context, David. So far, we've probably had fires wipe out an area the size of about half of Germany. We've probably lost something like 500 million to 1 billion animals of various species. Untold impact on biodiversity. The economic impact, some billions. But I think it's the downstream consequences which we're still trying to work through. But the core message for the Australian political establishment is climate change is real. And for the current Conservative government of Australia, who have repudiated a number of the actions which I took in office, the bottom line is, unless they undertake a 180-degree U-turn and lift Australia's global effort to reduce its own carbon footprint, as part of a global effort, lift our own national efforts to reduce carbon footprint, and as part of that, encourage the rest of the world to do the same, we're going to see more intense droughts, more intense fires, and disasters like this, not just in Mediterranean climates like Australia, the southern belt of Australia, but in Mediterranean climates everywhere. And then you've got a wider set of extreme weather events as well.
Good evening. Homes, caravan parks and sporting fields have all been inundated and cars swept away in flash flooding as a megastorm dumped hundreds of millimetres of rain across the southeast overnight. Rising water levels shut down the M1 for hours, causing traffic chaos. Theme parks too closed for the day, and there could be more rain on the way.
They knew there'd be rain, but no one expected this. Roads now rivers, residents forced to row boats down Gold Coast streets. The deluge causing landslides, water cascading through houses at Oxenford.
Our property, and it was about half a metre deep.
Backyards got water features, whether their owners wanted them or not.
Well, firstly, I thought, oh wow, that's going to be really difficult to kind of clean up. And then I realised it's a lot worse than I thought it was. So I really didn't know what to do.
Residents could do little but watch the water rise around them in their streets, yards and homes.
Bucketed down, we've got water through the roof and backyard. People above us, all their water's coming through our yard.
Cars swallowed up and sent floating down suburban streets.
There's a car there, a yellow one, gone.
A lucky escape for two people at Currumbin after a tree fell onto their car. Holiday makers at this Helensvale caravan park forced to flee in the early hours for their safety.
People were pretty distraught, especially children. Yeah, it was pretty hectic. Yeah, pretty quick. It just rose up so quick.
Dozens of caravans have been destroyed, campers forced to pack up and move on. The big wet meant big delays. Queensland's busiest highway, the M1, closed in both directions for 6 hours as water levels rose, causing mayhem on the motorway, leaving many drivers frustrated.
No one's given me any advice.
Some gave it a shot anyway. Many others caught out. Movie World looked more like Wet and Wild, closed for the day. Dreamworld shut down too. Car parks normally full at this time of year, completely empty. Entire sports precincts were swamped. Tennis courts became swimming pools. Horses at Mudgeeraba walked to higher ground, cows soggy and stranded as water rose around them. The deluge starting in the early hours, dumping up to 330 millimetres of rain, almost double the January average on parts of the Gold Coast in a matter of hours.
We saw some 1 in 100-year thresholds being met over southeast Queensland.
291 millimetres fell at Burleigh Waters, 301 at Carrara. Parts of the Sunshine Coast got up to 150 millimetres. Some localised flooding in Brisbane, 106 millimetres recorded at Mount Cootha. While the waters have receded quickly, the clean-up could take weeks.
There was nothing we could have done. It just, when it floods, there's nothing that'll stop it.
More than 500 insurance claims were lodged within hours of the storms. That number expected to rise. Ebony.
From flames to flash floods. Just a week ago, staff at this nature park were protecting their animals from oncoming bushfires. Now they're having to deal with another extreme.
There's the drain. It was also said absolutely inadequate. Have a go at it. Look at what's coming in the park, a wall of water.
Staff rushed koalas to safety.
Get back, mate, before you get back.
While for creatures more used to the wet, it was more about keeping them in their place. Heavy rain has fallen across New South Wales, one of the states worst affected by bushfires. In the state capital, Sydney, residents were remembering how to use an umbrella. The orange haze that had taken over the city's skyline, now cloudy grey.
We need a bit of rain and water to help with the fires, especially because how dry it was the past couple of days. And I think it will help with the haze as well, just push everything further out.
This is the wettest day in many, many months. We've only had about 4 days of rain in the last 4 months. And that rain has been only short, and this is well and truly the wettest day for a very long time.
For many in the country, the wet weather has brought relief and joy. More a case of sliding than singing in the rain. That rain has helped douse some, though not all, of the raging bushfires. But it does bring with it another set of dangers. With the land so dry and vegetation burnt away, water just bounces off the ground. As firefighters here are well aware, changing weather doesn't automatically mean changing fortunes.
People living in Metro Vancouver are bracing for snow and freezing temperatures for the next week in a part of Canada not used to a typical Canadian winter. Already, up to 15 centimetres of snow has fallen, producing piles of heavy wet slush. With temperatures dropping, this is all going to freeze. High winds led to power outages and ferry cancellations overnight. People living in parts of the BC interior are expecting an even more extreme cold spell. Temperatures are expected to plummet to as low as -25 with the wind chill. It's been a weekend of messy weather in southern Ontario. Roads and properties were inundated with a mix of snow and freezing rain. Parts of the Greater Toronto area received as much rain normally experienced in January and February combined. Overnight, police shut down a stretch of the Don Valley Parkway, one of Toronto's main arteries, because of flooding. Northeast of Toronto, plummeting temperatures made for treacherous conditions as the rain turned to ice. That same storm system pelted parts of Quebec with icy conditions. In Montreal, freezing rain turned into light snow, creating slippery roads and sidewalks. The system is now moving through Atlantic Canada. That bizarre weather swept through the southern and midwestern United States, bringing everything from snow to tornadoes. At least 11 deaths are being blamed on the severe weather. Jennifer Johnson reports.
Unusual spring-like storms tore through America's deep south, spawning deadly tornadoes. In Pickens County, Alabama, the damage was devastating. Larry Jones saw it all.
Trees, houses gone. Some are devastated, and some was not alive.
The storms killed several people and left neighborhoods unrecognizable.
Anytime you have a loss of life, it's a very devastating thing for all people. Across our whole community.
Another deadly tornado touched down in Bossier Parish, Louisiana, killing an elderly couple. Homes and businesses were also destroyed in Georgia after heavy winds and flash flooding pummeled that state.
The whole side of it's just gone.
The storms brought cold and snow to Texas, where a police officer and firefighter were killed in Lubbock while investigating a highway accident.
It's a huge loss for the public safety community here, and it was very unnecessary. If people would respect road conditions, things like this wouldn't have to happen.
The storms brought flash flooding to Oklahoma and further north, icy conditions in Kansas.
This is crazy. Powerful storms that are really more reminiscent of something we're used to seeing in the springtime. They slammed the south now with tornadoes, damaging winds, and flooding. Power has been knocked out to thousands of people, and at least 12 people have been killed. Our Kaylee Hartung is in Louisiana for us, where there was an EF2 tornado that cut a 40-mile path of destruction. Hello, Kaylee.
Yeah, that's right. Good morning, TJ. This is what it looks like when an EF2 tornado rips through your home. Jerry and Mary Sue Franks were killed when their home was torn from its foundation about 200 feet from where I'm standing. Take a look at this wide angle. 135-mile-per-hour winds shredding this home to the pieces you see around me. A lifetime of memories scattered across this vast area.
This morning, residents waking up to more destruction after 2 tornadoes touched down in the middle of the night. Residents reeling from the devastating tornadoes across the U.S. At least 12 people were killed during the severe weekend storms spanning from Texas to Ohio.
This is a fence on top of a home.
In Ohio, 2 tornadoes, forceful winds, uprooting this tree and ripping out the sidewalk underneath it. The strong winds sending this building's rooftop to the ground. The crushed debris blocking the entranceway as firefighters work to clear the streets below. And in Alabama, a tornado tormenting Pickens County, leaving 3 dead. In Louisiana, tornado damage toppling trees, uprooting hundreds, the destruction stretching for miles. The EF2 tornado eradicating homes, tossing this mobile home from its foundation, killing an elderly couple inside.
To wake up and see the news this morning was really sad.
In South Carolina, tornado damage ripping this school's roof right off. Brick and cement debris litter the lawn. The wind smashing these buses into each other. The top of these bleachers torn away.
The Franks family spent the weekend digging through mud and debris to salvage what they could.
They lined the beaches up and down the west coast. Dead seabirds, the majority of them common murres. We took this video of the birds in Manzanita back in 2015. It was something caretakers at the Wildlife Center of the North Coast had never seen before. They were treating hundreds of birds every day. Birds that were emaciated. There had been die-offs in the past, but nothing as massive as this.
This was something that sort of exceeded all past events and continued to go far beyond what anybody expected would ever happen.
Wildlife biologist John Pyatt had been studying the mass die-off ever since it happened. He says researchers counted about 62,000 dead or dying seabirds back in 2015 and 16, but he believes the actual number is much higher.
We estimate that The total actually killed was somewhere between 500,000 and 1.2 million.
Initially, scientists believed the birds died due to disease or toxins in the water, but recently they discovered it was likely a marine heat wave, also known as a warm blob. It was an area of unusually warm water about 300 feet deep and 1,000 miles long, stretching from California up past Washington. The warm water reduced the birds' food supply from the bottom up the food chain. The fish the birds needed to eat were not there.
What was clear to us is that the vast majority of these birds, regardless of where they came in, they were starving. They were very emaciated.
Pyatt says the warm blob also likely impacted Chinook salmon populations by killing off the food the young salmon would need to eat and survive. The good news, following 2016, the warm blob diminished. Pyatt says in the last couple of years, the mer population has nearly recovered, but the concern is not over. A new warm blob is forming offshore, and you can bet researchers will be watching it closely.
I'm certainly not predicting. It's complex oceanography, but we'll see what happens.
In Portland, Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
Scenes reminiscent of the devastating Murray-Darling carnage, this time on the Macleay River in northern New South Wales. Scores of fish suffocated in a stretch of river that locals estimate could be as long as 70 kilometres.
The ash from the recent fires washed into the river creates a nutrient-rich soup, which then takes all the oxygen out of the water. So fish were trying to get out of the water. They were gasping and dying in their hundreds and thousands on the riverbank.
Arthur Bain was recording as the fish fought for their lives.
Fish is really doing it tough here. They're stressing like mad.
A heartbreaking sight for members of the local fishing club.
I haven't seen anything like it before. It's crushed me.
To stem the loss, they used a bit of lateral thinking.
My son rang his brother-in-law and he said that they were doing it in the Murray-Darling when they had trouble out there with the waterways. And so we went and seen our local fire chief, Gerard Wade, and he gave us access to a fire pump and that. And they come down and set it up, and we're aerating the water from then until yesterday afternoon, approximately about 6 o'clock, when we got some rain, and it was starting to oxygenate the water, the rain.
And they're whacking that in, and the fish down there are just loving it.
But there are fears their efforts will be short-lived.
It's going to happen again.
With heavy rain predicted across the state, there are fears scenes like this could be repeated in many other areas affected by the ongoing devastating bushfires.
Definitely, it's a big risk. There's probably this risk of low oxygen when bacteria breaks down things. There's the risk of potential pollution from fire retardants that wash into the rivers, and silt that'll wash into the river could potentially impact fish, block their gills, those sorts of things.
There are calls for more to be done to prevent fish deaths.
And we definitely need to improve our bushfire management processes, encouraging people to work in partnerships to burn appropriately at the right time of year.
But at this time of year, all locals can do is hope for the best. Karen Thomas, ABC News, Bellbrook.
Joining us now, Tony Saig, White House impeachment spokesman. Tony, I hate mood questions. What's the mood at the White House? But come on, tell us the mood and don't spin it. What's the mood?
Laura, we've been consistently confident all along because the one fundamental and most important fact of the case has not changed. The president's done nothing wrong, and the reason Nancy Pelosi, after saying they amassed overwhelming evidence during the House hearing, saying the president in one of the articles was a real clear and present danger to the country, the reason she held it for a month was because she panicked that her case was weak. And you're an attorney. If you had a strong case, would you be saying after you've closed the investigation, wait a minute, we need more witnesses, wait a minute, we need more documents? No matter what she thinks the qualifications of her managers are, the bottom line is they have a fundamentally flawed case, and that's going to be exposed in the Senate trial, which we know is going to offer a much more fair process for our White House counsel's office with Pat Cipollone and his team being able to actually tell the president's side of the story in a fair, open, and transparent way. And we feel very strongly in the strength of our case, and we're going to make it in the Senate.
Okay, I just want to, speaking of theatrics and mood, okay, the parade of managers walk the articles of impeachment over to the Senate. I mean, I only thing I could think of the media covering it was like the OJ, you know, the white Bronco. It was like, okay, here come the article. Oh, we got to, okay. So they're bringing on this big black folder there. Doesn't it look like the funeral dirge for the Democrat Party?
Well, they're marching the two weakest articles in the history of impeachment over to the Senate.
Funeral dirge playing in the background. Yeah, it's like it's a wake for the Democrat Party with a little black casket there in front holding the article.
She's already marched her caucus off the cliff, Laura, and whether or not they pay the political consequence of it next year, many people have reason to believe they will, is yet to be seen. The reality is it's going to go to the Senate, where they're not going to be able to rig the process. So therefore, they only win when they get to rig the process, as they did in the House.
Well, even CNN wasn't buying the seriousness and the historic nature of all this with the theatrics. Watch.
It was unusual to see that kind of ceremony and making, handing out the pens and smiling for a picture in this kind of situation.
I thought that was a little jarring and certainly, I think, off message, because you heard Nancy Pelosi there say, in fact, that this was a sad and tragic day. And then there she is holding up the pen and having photographs taken.
Yeah, I'm surprised they're both still working at CNN tonight after saying that. But
that's finally correct analysis. She also fist pumped today when she was on the House floor, and someone had repeated that Donald Trump now is impeached forever, which, by the way,
that's my other
reveals what we've known all along.
President Trump's Senate impeachment trial will formally begin next week. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts was sworn in as presiding officer. Then each senator was called down to sign the oath book. They swore they would deliver impartial justice in the trial. But what happens next week once the Senate reconvenes? Our Natalie Brand joins me now from Capitol Hill. So, Natalie, what can we expect to see next week once this trial starts?
Good evening to you, Elaine. Senators will be returning Tuesday at around 1 p.m., and that's when they will begin the debate over the rules of this trial, so we can get a much better picture of what the proceedings will actually look like. And we know that Republican leaders in the Senate have used the 1999 Clinton trial as a model, or they're signaling that they want to use that as a model. We know back then senators met behind closed doors in a room to really hash out the ground rules for an impeachment trial. At that time, the resolution was passed unanimously. But Democratic senators argue that this is a very different impeachment process just by nature of how the investigation played out on the House side in an expedited nature with congressional investigators versus DOJ investigators. So they're arguing that this particular trial calls for a different type of proceedings. And as we've heard, Democratic lawmakers have called for additional witnesses. They want that issue to be brought up right away.
The Week of Prayer for Christian Unity begins this Saturday. It is celebrated by the world's 2.4 billion Christians. Throughout the week, Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, Anglicans, and members of all Christian denominations reflect on the elements they have in common, not on those that separate them. The Pope spoke about it during his meeting with representatives of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Finland, who make a pilgrimage to Rome each year around this time.
La comunità di tutti i battezzati non è un mero stare gli uni accanto agli altri, e certamente non è uno stare gli uni contro gli altri, ma vuole diventare un sempre più profondo stare insieme. L'ecumenismo spirituale e il dialogo ecumenico servono ad approfondire questo stare insieme.
The Week of Prayer for Christian Unity was established in 1908 by Episcopalian Paul Watson. In 1968, Catholics officially joined the initiative. Each year, a different Christian community prepares a prayer. This year, it was written by Christians from Malta. It's called "They Showed Us Unusual Kindness." These were the words St. Paul used upon arriving to the island after a shipwreck. Pope Francis will conclude the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity next Saturday with an ecumenical prayer at the tomb of St. Paul in Rome.